Looking to enhance the appeal and performance of your gym with state-of-the-art equipment? Look no further than the Gym Administrator. Founded by Sal Corrente, professional wrestling manager, promoter, and author of the great book Bruno Sammartino, the autobiography of wrestling's living legend, available on Amazon.com, the Gym Administrator will spot you on that final rep and assist you every step of the way from purchase through installation, whether it be strength training, cardiovascular training, or performance enhancement. The Gym Administrator works with a wide array of leading vendors and suppliers, carefully selected to meet the diverse needs of your clientele. Service the way you remember it. Contact us at 914-494-1066 or visit our website at thegymadministrator.com, as well as all social media platforms. The Gym Administrator. All your fitness needs under one roof. Scan the barcode at the bottom of the screen to get started today.
All right, welcome to another episode of This Week in Pro Wrestling with your host, Mike Monty and Jimmy Farrow. Jimmy, how are you, buddy?
Good. What's going on, bro? Back again.
I got to tell you, we got a special guest tonight, but he's not so special anymore. He's quite the regular on the show now, and he's a sponsor.
That makes him not so special.
Well, it makes him part of the team. It makes him part of the team. Is that a better way to say it? Right?
Yeah,
part of the team.
I think so. Yeah, that's better.
But we got to talk to Abe, because these guys, every time we have a guest on, they're in the room and we have no clue, and you and me are bullshitting about whatever.
Right.
And they hear all our dirty secrets.
To some miracle, we haven't said anything horrible these couple of times. But Abe, you got to let us know what's going on here.
Dirty secrets giveaway. So before we get to our special guest, Sal Corrente, the big cheese, we're bringing him on specifically because, unfortunately, one of the icons in wrestling, Sika Amituana'i, who passed away at the age of 79. Before we get to Sal, bro, I wanted to read Roman Reigns' tweet on X. They still call it a tweet on X. I might have that wrong, but my family and I thank everyone for the outpouring of support in the name of my father, Sika Amituana'i, who will forever be remembered as one half of the Wild Samoans tag team. My father had a profound impact on the entire family, and we are forever grateful for the foundation he built for us. There is no way to fill the void left by his passing, but my sisters and I will do our best to represent him and his legacy. Rest in power, Dad. We love you. Farrow, before we get to Sal, I wanted to hear your thoughts on the passing of the great Sika and one of your fondest memories about Sika and the Wild Samoans.
Well, the Samoans are obviously from that very early time period when I first started watching wrestling. The Samoans were one of the greatest tag teams ever, one of the greatest heels ever, as far as tag teams go, with the great Lou Albano as their manager. Sika, you know what was cool about the Samoans? And look, this is when we're kids, okay? This is not today's information, like we have everything at the tip of our fingers nowadays, but the Samoans sometimes would even get title shots. I don't know if you remember those days, Mike, but you know, Sika number 2 or Sika Samoan number 2 or Samoan. I loved how they never identified them, by the way. It was Bob Backlund versus Samoan number 1 or Samoan number 2.
Yes.
And you weren't sure who you were going to get that night. But you know what's funny? Being a little kid back then, I took those title shots very seriously. And obviously 20,000 other people did, because Madison Square Garden would sell out for Bob Backlund versus one of the Samoans. So the Samoans had drawing power as a tag team. They had drawing power as individuals. They were clearly first ballot Hall of Famer guys. Sika, I remember being, look, we do that with tag teams today, like Tamatanga. I think he's a little more badass than Loa. That's just me personally. I felt Sika was a little bit more of the badass of the two, for whatever that's worth, between Sika and Offer. And you're really talking about two really mean-looking guys, one way or the other.
Well,
they both had it.
When we speak to Sal, we'll actually find out who was legitimately more badass. I'm assuming both were badass, but maybe one was a little more than the other. For me, Jimmy, two moments basically was when Tony Atlas and Rocky Johnson defeated the Samoans for the tag team title. And I forget which Samoan it was, but he took an actual wooden chair over the head. Remember, I don't know if those were gimmicked or whatever, but that match is etched in my brain. Tony Atlas celebrating Samoan getting hit over the head with the wood chair, and the falling on his back with the chair around his neck.
Yes.
Yeah. And then my
great.
other big remembrance was when they turned face against Murdoch and Adonis, when Murdoch and Adonis were the tag team champions. I was always amazed by that. By the way, Phil DeCesare says that moment sticks out for him too, an iconic moment. So good way to parlay over to the Big Cheese. Sal Corrente, the accomplished writer, wrestling agent, business owner. This guy's done it all. And not only that, we gratefully thank him for all the help that he's given to the show. He's kindly brought in all his talented friends to be interviewed by us, and it's incredible. Big Cheese, thank you on such short notice coming in so we could speak about your close friend, Sika.
Yes, obviously I wish it was under other circumstances, but as we're getting older, I mean, this is just a fact of life, and so many people are passing now. Obviously we're going to talk a great deal here about Sika, but that picture that I just sent you, that's me and Afa in the hotel room straight after TV, after Albano hit him in the head with the chair.
Wow, I love it. We're going to put that up in a second here.
George Washington Motor Lodge, where we all stayed. It's a Home Depot now, but that was where the majority of the boys stayed. If it was full, which sometimes it was, we go down the road to maybe the Quality Inn or something there in Bethlehem, but where most of us stayed there in Allentown. I wasn't overly surprised that when I got the word about Sika. I mean, he's not been doing so great. It really makes you think of the last 42 years. I met these guys in 1982. I believe I sent you a picture of the day that I met them, and I was quite honestly scared to death. But the guys that broke me into the business, Dominic Marcello and Mike DeVanzo, they knew these guys extremely well from their previous run. And it was the kind of thing, Dominic actually couldn't make it that day. He sometimes had work issues, but Mike's jobs, he had his regular days off were Tuesday and Wednesday, so he never had to miss a TV. We'd go down Tuesday morning, we'd get to the building, and we'd leave after the Hamburg show on Wednesday night, and he'd go to work on Thursday morning. And that was just the way it was for a long time. So what had happened is the Samoans were in Louisiana, I believe, working for Bill Watts. And, I don't know, I guess they didn't like the way business was being done there. They were finishing up, I guess, working with the Junkyard Dog and Mr. Olympia, and it just doesn't sound like things were going right. And I've talked to other people that confirmed that. So they were going to come back to New York. They had written Mike a letter, and he had been telling me all the stories. Of course, I hadn't met them at all, didn't know them, only as a fan. And but Mike showed me the letter that Alpha wrote him, told them they would be the ones to replace Fuji and Saito. So we were just waiting for them to come in, and then we went down, and I met them that day, and spent more time talking to Alpha that particular day. But slowly but surely, we just kept hanging around, and Mike and them were already extremely close. And Mike is the godfather to Alpha's son, Alpha Jr. And eventually then I actually got in the business, becoming a referee. And I was on a show, I'm sorry, I was on a show, it was a Spanish show somewhere in Queens, maybe the Ridgewood Grove Arena, I think, actually. They gave me one match, the New York State Athletic Commission. It was two guys couldn't speak English and couldn't go the amount of time they were supposed to go either. And so that was some sort of experience, but it wasn't great, and I wasn't great. It was my first time. Didn't ring the bell to start the match, didn't ring the bell to end the match. Everything in between was probably okay, except that these guys just ran out of gas. Then I had another show. It was a much better show. I worked with Pretty Boy Larry Sharp, Larry Winters, and Damian Kane, and still just learning. And then by this time now, AFA's ready to start trying to push me with other people. So this Pro Wrestling USA was starting, and Gary Juster was heading that up, I guess, for the AWA. And they were going to run the New Haven Memorial Coliseum. Well, AFA had spoken to Gary Juster, and he told me, Sal, they said they'll start using you next month. They can't use you this month, but they will start using you next month. But I'm at the arena with them at the New Haven Coliseum, which of course no longer exists, but that was a regular stop for the WWF. And it was becoming evident to me there was no referee there except Dick Kroll. Now, they had a pretty large card that night, and that was a good card. It was about a $50,000 house back in 1985. That's, not bad. I mean, it's not a sellout, of course, but it was a pretty decent house, and it was a good card. Backlund was on there, working against Baron von Raschke, I think, and Rick Martel against Jimmy Garvin, Slaughter and Kamala. So it was a Tonga Kid against Larry Zbyszko. So it was a strong card. Well, I told AFA, I said, look, man, they're short referees. He said, look, don't start any trouble. He said, I already told you they're going to use you next month. I said, but AFA, I'm telling you, they only have one referee. I'm not trying to start any trouble. I'm just letting you know. They must need another one. So luckily, Gary Juster comes walking in at that moment. And, AFA says, well, Gary, I want to introduce you to my friend. Oh, you're the referee? I said, yeah. He said, well, we're short referees. I said, yeah, I know. And he said, well, do you have your stuff? I said, it's in the car. He said, we'll hold the show. Just go get your stuff. So I go get my stuff, and the Alaskans were going to wrestle Rocky Jones, who, of course, is no longer with us, and somebody. Larry Sharp was wrestling one of his students, and then I was going to work. This is the first time in the ring with AFA and Sika. March 23rd, 1985, they're wrestling Mark and Jay Youngblood. So this was the biggest match I had done to date. I mean, everything else I did, it just, wasn't big stars or anything like that. And certainly if they weren't in a competitive match. Well, my training was different than everybody else's. So this match turned into a double DQ. Well, when this happened, I started realizing that the first guy I ever took a bump for in the business was Sika. And of course, I was just green as grass, right? So, like I said, this thing was turned into a double DQ, and these guys are just chopping the hell out of each other and so forth. And I'm just trying to keep my sanity in there. And, Sika just nails me in the back. And, these guys are so rough looking and this, that, and the other, but, it didn't hurt at all. And it took me 3 seconds to realize it was supposed to hurt. So it was kind of terrible on my part, and the people knew it. It was probably one of the worst moves I ever made. It was just terrible, but I hadn't really thought about that until this happened. That the first guy I ever took a bump for in the business was Sika, and but it was a big deal for me, of course, to work with these guys after hanging out with them for 2.5 years, and just going up and down the road and eating or having parties at the house or whatever. So yeah, it was a kind of big deal. And, these guys didn't have to take me into their, people always ask me because of the Bruno book, and everything I did with Bruno, why you? Well, look, I don't even know why with the Samoans, I mean, who knows why somebody likes somebody. And, quite honestly, I didn't get along with the Giant at all. And there's people that'll tell you the Giant's great. Other people tell you the Giant just didn't like certain people. I happen to be one of them. I don't know. I had no I had no desire to be around him, and he certainly had no desire to be around me.
Well, not to break off into the Giant, but we never heard this story that Jimmy's taking it from here. How did you know you didn't like that the Giant didn't like you, and like how did that happen? Like when were you aware that happened?
I guess I had a match with Terry Taylor, I guess. And, first of all, I was a New York State Athletic Commission referee, and we were not looked upon well anyway by these people. And I'm not sure if he knew my connection to the Samoans or not, but Terry was trying to talk to me, and it was clear that, he didn't want him to talk to me. And Terry eventually just said, thank you, and left. And, from there, we never spoke. But it really had nothing to do with him. He wasn't even in the match. But nobody's going to say anything to Andre one way or the other. And, there are people who love Andre. I got friends of mine who love Andre. And I know for a fact that if he liked you, the sun rose and set on you. But there were people he didn't like.
There was no point in this where, again, I know you said
No,
you didn't talk to him, but did you
no.
ever think to yourself, like, I got to find out why he doesn't like me?
No. He's just not that type of guy. If he didn't like you, I saw him yell at the Sheik one night, and he certainly didn't like the Iron Sheik, and who knows what the reason is. But quite honestly, I didn't know anybody else that didn't like the Sheik. We all thought he was kind of crazy at times, but I don't know anybody that didn't like him. Everybody else liked him. But if Andre didn't like you, he didn't like you. And if he did, you could probably do no wrong.
Well, if it's any consolation, Sal, Jimmy and I like you, so there you go.
Well, thank you very much. I would have liked to know what I did, but I just don't worry about it. And I don't talk about Andre much. We were actually shortly before he died. I did talk to him on the phone. Of course, I'm sure he didn't know who he was talking to, but I was planning a trip to China with Rob Russin, and they wanted him over there. And so we had called him, but the trip didn't have a chance to materialize before Andre passed. And then, I guess the whole thing fell apart. But talking about, who was rougher, you guys were talking about who was rougher. I don't know who was rougher. But what I do know is this. I'll tell you a story about Freddie Blassie. Well, the night Wendy Richter won the women's title, we all went to this club. I don't remember what the name of the club was, but Martha Quinn from MTV was there. And I guess we went to two clubs, actually. We went one place, and then they brought us somewhere else. Well, we were having trouble getting into the second club. And the WWE office people were mentioning the Samoans' name, and we're all standing right there. Well, they were starting to become disrespectful. So I see Office start taking off his watch. Luckily, somebody came to the door, recognized the Samoans, and brought us all in. Now, I told that story to Freddie Blassie at the next TV, and he said, well, I can tell you this right now. If it was the other guy, Sika, the last thing on his mind would have been taking off his watch. So he would have just dove right in. That's the difference. Now, if they were in a room together, who comes out? I guess I can't be sure. But Afa's approach and Sika's approach, two totally different things. You can talk to Afa in a different way than you can talk to Sika. And, some people didn't understand that. Treating Sika the way you would treat Afa, it just wasn't a working thing. One day some guy was really getting on Sika's nerves, and Afa said to me, Sal, you better get this guy out of here. He said, I'm telling you. He said, this is not going to go well at all. He said, he's pissing Sika off, and he don't know it. Which he was, and, so forth. But we settled that all down. But, Sika was definitely, definitely the one that's going to go off first if he's feeling disrespected or anything like that. Luckily, I never had any problems with him, of course. And, quite honestly, I did some dumb things at the beginning of my career, not on purpose. He had a lot of patience with me, man. And, eventually we tagged up against me and him against Dominic DeNucci and Preston Steele in Ohio. And, it was a lot of fun, working with Don. Of course, him and Dominic had worked hundreds of times. And, me and Preston and there were basically our teachers. And Preston Steele, I don't know if you know Preston Steele, but he worked for a long time. And in the Ohio area, ran shows, worked with us, came to Australia with us. Rob Russin and him were very tight, and Dominic taught him. And the Samoans were my teachers, and we tagged up. Matter of fact, we had a 2 out of 3 falls tag team match in Ohio, and the Samoans had this thing where you bang their heads together, and of course they would hurt each other, if you remember, in bigger matches. And then when they became baby faces, of course, you'd bang their heads together and they would just look at each other. Well, here I am, this little runt tagging up with Sika. So in a 2 out of 3 falls match, I said, look, when Pete will come over, and I think it was Pete, maybe it was Dominic, I don't know. He'll throw our heads together, but when he throws our heads together, you turn around and yell at the audience, and I'm just going to fall backwards and let them cover me, right? Because obviously my head ain't like your brother's head. So you're hitting me, I'm going down immediately. And by the time he turns back around, I'm already beat. And people really liked it, but then they were like, oh my God, the match is over, because basically the bell had just rung. But we were going 2 out of 3 falls, so we still put in enough time. And then Sika would mentor me after the match, and because I really didn't have a lot of in-ring training. I almost had none. My training was really very unique, and a lot of it was done by Alpha. But Sika would take me in certain situations where I did dumb stuff. And the first couple of years I did some dumb stuff, man. I mean, I don't mind telling you. I mean, but if anybody's honest, you fail your way to the top. I mean, if you look at guys' matches when they first started, they're a hell of a lot greener than they'd be 2 or 3 years later.
Sal, what happened behind the scenes? You told us earlier that the first bump you ever took was from Sika himself. It's your first night meeting these guys, and you actually almost forget to even realize, but you did realize what you said. Like 3 seconds later, you realize, crap, I got to sell this bump. Does Sika go backstage and give you a funny look, like, who's the new guy who almost didn't take a bump?
No. I met them in November of '82. This match was in '85. We hung around for 2.5 years, but the first time being in the ring with them. Said my training wasn't traditional. My training was more psychological, and the idea of me being a wrestler, really, that wasn't on the table at the time. So there wasn't really any of that going on. He knew how. Listen, believe me, if he didn't know me, I would have probably had a real problem.
Right.
And to be honest with you, there were at least 2 other occasions where dumb stuff was done. Now, one was probably not my fault. It was probably, but I know the stupid things that I did caused Sika to probably panic that something was going wrong. It was not going wrong, but I understood completely. So he hit the ring. I guess he jumped over Rocky Johnson. Let me see. Yeah, maybe he jumped over Rocky Johnson and took me and flung me across the ring. I didn't say anything because I kind of figured out where he was going with it, but and it was all fine. But we had some interesting times. But I enjoyed tagging with those guys, whether it was just me and Alpha or just me and Sika, and or all of us together. Great times with these guys. I mean, the Samoans are just very unique people. Grew up with the kids. Rikishi, also on that show I was telling you about was the first match for Rikishi. He was the Tonga Kid #2. I've got a picture of him and his brother here. They're almost identical. I mean, Rikishi ended up replacing the Tonga Kid in Japan, and the Japanese people never even knew the difference between Little Sam. The office was questioning Jimmy Snuka. He said, no, this is the Tonga Kid. It wasn't. And at the end, he told them the truth. He said, Japanese people never figured it out. I don't remember why Tonga Kid couldn't go, but they needed somebody to go in his place, and it went fine. But that was Rikishi's first match that night. He had never had a match yet, and they needed people for the Battle Royal. So I told Alpha, I said, let's get Junior in the Battle Royal. He said, Sal, I'm not sure he's ready. He said, Alpha, it's a Battle Royal. Ready for what? I said, just let him go. And he did. And, it all was fine. And then, of course, from there, his career started. So that was my first big match. It was his first match to begin with. And, it was a good night. It was a good night. Mistake and all, it was a good night. And then shortly thereafter, unfortunately, we went overseas. And I think when we got back, Jay Youngblood had died, which was terrible. That was my first time working with Jay. Even though I'm close to Steamboat, I wasn't close to them. You know, I didn't really know Steamboat yet when he was tagging with Jay Youngblood, but I thought they were a great team.
As a pro wrestling fan, what can you tell us what the Samoans meant to you just as a fan?
Well, I was
of
scared
the
to
games?
death to begin with. You know, I remember the thing that stands out, two things stand out to me the most, is when they made their first appearance, the way Vince McMahon reacted to them hitting the TV screen. I thought was, you know, over the top, because these guys walk in there like two gorillas. You know, I had never seen anything like that. As far as wrestling, everybody else looked somewhat normal. But these guys look wild, and you know, that was their goal, is to look wild. You know, if you remember back in the day, when a heel would come in, they'd eventually get to Dominic DeNucci. And, you know, if you beat DeNucci on television, pretty much, you know, you would be in line for Backlund pretty quick. Well, you know, DeNucci would always come close to beating these guys, and he'd hit them with headbutts and stuff like that. And, you know, he'd rock them, and maybe a manager would interfere, maybe they wouldn't. But the bottom line is that in the case of the Samoans, when DeNucci headbutted one of the Samoans, he started to fall backwards. That, I couldn't even conceive of that happening, because I'd been watching DeNucci headbutt guys for quite a while, and they always, you know, sold that headbutt. Well, these guys didn't sell it at all. And that's what I remember as standing out. And then, of course, you know, Tito was going to wrestle Rene, or not was going to. Tito and Rene Goulet were taking them on television. And they had Goulet, I think it was, in the corner, upside down, and they're putting the boots to him. Ivan Putski eventually hits the ring, and then, you know, that it's going to be Putski and Santana. And then, of course, they won the titles. And, you know, until I met these guys, Dominic Marcello and Mike DeVanzo, I didn't know much about anything. Didn't even know where the TVs came from, because they never announced that. You know, Joe McHugh would say, you know, this matches are sanctioned by the State Athletic Commission. They didn't even say what state, right? And you know it really
Right.
South. So when I saw the pictures, I like, where do you get? Well, we go to the TV table. Well, where do they do that? Well, Allentown, Pennsylvania. Can I come? Yeah, sure. But it was pretty close to a year before the Samoans came to town. They came to town in, I believe, November of '82. And then this big card I'm telling you about was like March of '85. So we were just all buddies until I got in. You know, the New York State Athletic Commission was not easy to get to. You really had to have a connection to get your license. And then, quite honestly, you had to push to get any work, because you had your guys that were getting most of the work. And they had some political connection, so I had to go out and get one. But once I started working, then it was fine. But then a few years later, I left the state. So, you know, I only did so much work in New York, and started doing things in other places.
Did you have a preference to be a referee or a wrestler, or neither one really for you in the end?
No, I liked it all, but I guess, you know, being a wrestler was, you know, was more fun. But I was a good referee. I felt like they brought me to a lot of places. The AWA brought me in. Puerto Rico brought me in for their big shows. You know, for a while I was known as the troubleshooting referee. But, you know, it's like everything else. Okay, well, I've done that for, I guess 7 years. And, you know, now they got me managing Kamala in Australia. And I'm like, well, why don't I just start managing? You know, and then from there, well, you're a manager, you start to get involved in matches, and, you know, then you just keep going. But it seemed to be a natural progression, but I love being a referee.
Hey, Sal.
Sal, was it
Go ahead, Jimmy.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Jimmy. Go.
Yeah, was it perfect place, perfect time? Because I'm trying to picture a kid today. How old were you when you first broke in? Hold that thought for a second. I'm thinking to myself, how could a kid today, at the age you were at when you got in the very unusual way you got in, considering today's internet and the way everybody communicates with each other, or the lack thereof, is it possible that a kid today could break into the business in the most unique way that you did?
Well, keep in mind, there's a lot more, the travel's a lot different today. TVs held in all different places. I mean, this whole Allentown thing, Allentown and Hamburg, that was like a family there. A lot of the same people came, and guys like Tom Brandy and AJ Petrucci were young, and Tom Brandy used to just be in the audience there. But every 3 weeks you'd see a lot of the same people. And my first TV was when Buddy Rogers showed up. Professor Elliott knew Mike and Dominic. He didn't know me, but he came out. He said, "Hey guys, you know who's in there? Buddy Rogers." So when Buddy Rogers first came back to Allentown, that was my first day, whatever that was. And that was in sometime in 1982, I believe. No, I'm sorry, that was in 1981. Probably sometime after September. I had probably just turned 18. And immediately they put me in charge of the backdoor security. I don't know why, but I was fine with it. So I would let the wrestlers in and out. And then in Hamburg, I would watch the heel side. And that went on until we went to Poughkeepsie.
Sal,
You sound
Sal, when Sika lost his son, Rosey, how did that affect him? Did you talk to him about that situation?
I don't remember if we had any specific conversations about it, but I liked Matt. He was a good guy. I don't know. Did I send you the picture of us all tagging together?
I don't think so. I'll check.
I'll send you that here in a minute. But Matt was a really good guy. And look, my parents lost a daughter. I lost my sister here July 29th. I believe it'll be 3 years. I don't think parents get over that. It's people ask me about it, and I don't think parents get over that. Now, the way people handle that and the way they mourn is different, but ultimately, parents shouldn't be burying children. So I don't know how he took it. These guys seem to take everything much easier than the average person does. But what's going on in their own thoughts, I can't tell you, but I'm sure it was not good. I mean, just experiencing with my own parents. These are things that, nobody's sitting around waiting to happen, right? Children are supposed to be waiting for their parents to pass, not the other way around.
Now you mentioned they seem to take it a little better. Why do you think that is? Like, why do you think that?
Well, look, let's face it, they didn't have the simplest life in the world. Growing up younger, they came up the hard way. And, I don't know. They just, you know what? They're just tough, plain and simple. They're tough people. I don't know how you explain it. I really don't. But they're extremely, extremely tough people. And, I guess when you have a life like that, you have a tough life, you can probably hide things better. You know what I mean? Because I'm sorry, I just don't know that any parent, the way they display it to us is one thing. But, what they're feeling about it inside, I mean, look, these guys are normal people, right? I mean, they may be performers and they may have been very unique performers, but when it's all said and done, these guys, are people like everybody else. As a parent lost a son, I can't say. And look, I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm not the guy who needs to be discussing that with people because I don't know what to say. Because no matter what you say, it's either routine or, maybe it's the wrong thing because you just don't know. Now, I'll listen if they want to talk, but you either just make some statement out of common courtesy or not. I mean, Matt was a big guy and, I probably tied in, but, I really liked him. He was a great guy, man. You want to talk about a gentle giant. He was it.
Well, on a positive note then, how did he feel about his son, Roman Reigns, who certainly was on his way to becoming a pro football player before, unfortunately, he was stricken down with leukemia. But obviously bounced back to become one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. But did he ever relay to you how he felt about how proud he was of his son?
Yeah, I would talk to the family more. I hadn't been able to have conversations with Sika here for a while. But there's no question he's proud of his son. I mean, his son is doing fantastic. And obviously, yes, quite honestly, Rocky Johnson, when I talked about The Rock when he was younger, neither one of these guys, I'm sure, wanted their son to be in wrestling. But first of all, they were judging wrestling based on the business that they were in. If you'd have told these guys that both of their kids were going to grow up, end up being multimillionaires, be performing all over the world on a regular basis, the kind of television exposure they'd have, they might have had a different opinion. But when I said to, Dwayne was just a little guy when I started coming around. And, I said, Rock, one day we got to get the kid in the business. Not my son. My son's going to play football. Well, I mean, his career has so far eclipsed anything that would have happened if he made it. He says sometimes, our Warren Sapp got in his way, The Rock. Well, you know what? Warren Sapp probably did him a favor. Yeah, how many of the guys that wrestled started out in football didn't really make it? They had to come back to wrestling anyway. But I don't think either one of these guys wanted their kids to be in the wrestling business. Football was the intention. That's where they wanted him to go. But luckily, fate intervened, and, The Rock is obviously a major star. Roman Reigns is a major, major star. He's able to work even with the physical challenges he has. He looks like $1 million. And who knows, maybe Hollywood will be next for him. But, they've really done some great things, and he's a company guy, and he could be relied on, and that's important too. It's one of the most important things in this business. When they gave the Honky Tonk Man the Intercontinental Belt, they just said one thing: take it and run with it. They're not really, in those days, weren't looking for time off and any of that. It's like, hey, we're in towns every day. We need you there. That's the best.
Sal, it sounds like you were closer to Alpha. Did you stay in touch with Alpha over the years on a consistent basis? Either of the two?
With Alpha all the time, yes. With Sika, not as not as much. We'd see each other at things, and of course, for several years you see them a lot. But when he was at home, I didn't see him as much. Now we crossed paths in some events, and I think I worked with I did. I worked with him and Lanny Poffo, now that I think about it, in New York, and so forth. And then I would bring them in for shows. I brought them in '97. I brought them in for a big outdoor show I had to work with. I don't even remember who we worked with, actually. It was me and the Samoans and the Disco Inferno and Gene Ligon. We had a 10-man tag with some guys, probably Gorgeous Gary Royal and the Love Connection and a couple other guys. I don't know. But yeah, Alpha was more of the business side of the business. And, that was really where my head was at. Plus, Alpha was more located closer to me. Where Sika was always down there in Pensacola. Well, I'd only been to Pensacola. Now I was there. I went to Pensacola, and we went out with, it was Rikishi's mom's birthday. And we all went out to a big thing. The Usos, they were like, I don't know, 8 or 9-year-old twins at the time, just running around. Of course, nobody had any idea where they were going in life at that point. But they were there. We went out to this big dinner in Pensacola. But Pensacola wasn't a regular stop for me. If it had been, I would have seen Sika a lot more, probably. But Alpha was always living in Pennsylvania and running shows and et cetera. So, more of the business side of the business was done with Alpha.
Sal, where do the Samoans end up in the history? Like, I understand the newer fan doesn't, just like with all sports, right? They kind of forget the past. But you're quite the expert, especially with professional wrestling. Where do the Samoans' legacy land in the history of wrestling?
Well, I really think that's defined by age groups. I mean, I see all the time people getting asked who their Mount Rushmore is. I think you guys asked Wendy Richter a woman's Mount Rushmore the other night.
Yeah.
And what I would tell you is it's really all based on the era you grew up in. The idea that anybody would have a Mount Rushmore without Bruno Sammartino on it is crazy. But when it's all said and done, if you didn't grow up watching Bruno, you don't really understand that. You know, you're putting other guys on. And, you know, I think for fans who knew it at the time, you know, the Samoans were almost seemed to be an unbeatable force. You know, I booked Stan Hansen one time. It's the first time I really met Stan. We brought him down to North Charleston, South Carolina. He's going to wrestle Nikita Koloff. I was referee for the match, and it was a wild brawl, man. I mean, it really was. I was lucky to get out of there with my life, I thought. But before the thing, I told him, I said, you know, Stan, I was broken in by the Samoans. Now, Stan's a rough guy. I don't think anybody has any question in their mind. And we're talking about 1989, probably, maybe 90, something like that. And he said, man, those are some rough boys. He said, I'm telling you right now, those are just some rough boys. Now, I never heard Stan say anybody was rough. But, you know, that's what he said. I mean, you know, these guys, put it this way, I look at it as, you know, you hear about this one with that one, but you don't hear about anybody who tried to test the Samoans. I asked Bruno if anybody tested him. He said, Sal, not that I can remember. You know, you certainly don't hear of anybody saying that they tested Haku. You don't hear of anybody saying they tested the Barbarian. You know, these are just certain guys. You know, push came to shove. You know, I remember Ricky Steamboat one time though said, you know, if wrestling was only the roughest people, there'd only be about 5 in it, and they wouldn't draw you a dime. You know, the Samoans were not only rough, but they were amazing performers. You know, now I had a talk with Sika one time. Alpha trained him. You know, Peter Maivia, Rocky Johnson, and somebody else, I can't remember the guy's name, trained Alpha, but Alpha pretty much trained his brother. But Sika told me, he said, you know, a lot of the ways I learned the business was buying magazines and looking at the holds in the pictures.
Well, you know, speaking of that, then I'll ask you, is it true? I believe it was, oh my God. Well, it was one of our family members, Jay Will, asked, were they not smartened up to the business, and in San Francisco they would attack the wrestlers because they were so angry, and that's how they became wrestlers?
That's very true. As a matter of fact, I think Sika probably got locked up one night. Pat Patterson was a big heel, and some Japanese guy that he was working with that Pat maybe in a tag team with, and they went after him. This is what I can tell you. Alpha tells a story many times of, and it's probably on that video that I sent you that was done with High Spots. I don't know if you took a listen to that at all, but there's a lot of good stuff in there. Alpha was traveling with Peter, and well, Alpha wasn't in the business yet, so Sika certainly wasn't. Well, Peter was a babyface in San Francisco at the time, and he was working with some Japanese guy, and I don't remember the names. Alpha told it to me once, but I don't remember the name. And it wasn't somebody that I was familiar with, but he was obviously a Japanese heel in San Francisco. And Alpha would just be sitting at ringside, and they'd be doing some finish every night where this guy throws the salt in Peter's face. Well, one day Alpha says, Uncle, you know, I've been watching this guy, and I'm pretty sure I know when he's going to throw the salt. He said, you know, tomorrow night, I will, you know, when I see he's getting ready to throw that salt, I'll run in the ring and I'll help you. And he said, listen, you just keep an eye on me. If I put up one finger, I'm good. If I put up 2 fingers, you hit the ring. Well, of course, Alpha's out there every night waiting for the second finger. It ain't coming. You know what I mean? But when these guys were just fans, yeah, I'm pretty sure they started a near riot in the Cow Palace with Pat Patterson and this other guy. Yeah, that's definitely a true story. You know, the Samoans were brought to Vince McMahon's attention by Andre the Giant. You know, he must have seen them down south or something, and that's how they got there. First time they came in, Vince McMahon, they just did TV, and Vince McMahon sent them home with like $3,000 each. Now, if you go back to like 1979, that's like the equivalent of $12,000. Told them, go home, have a good Christmas with your family, and let's come back here and make some money. Mm. And, you know, that was how the big move in New York started. The truth of the matter is this. These guys should have been in New York a lot sooner. They would have had a much longer legacy. But then, of course, just as the TV's really starting to explode is when they left. You know, they did at least one TV in Poughkeepsie. I don't know if they did any more than that. But, you know, it's all just timing. But I think if push comes to shove, to me, they were as great a tag team as you're going to get, especially on the heel side.
Did they leave on any kind of bad terms? I find it fascinating that they left right before everything explodes, like you just said. But over the years, obviously, the family has remained very much a part of the WWE, you know, product. Was there ever any like heat when they would leave? How would Alpha go about leaving a Vince McMahon Jr., but being, you know, able to have his family still work for Vince for many decades to come? How does that work with Alpha?
Well, keep in mind, you know, that Alpha came back with the Head Shrinkers himself and was still wrestling in six-mans and managing the kids. You know, look, very few people ever left the WWF and stayed gone. I mean, if you think about it, you could have problems with Vince McMahon, but these guys do business, right? And if they think that you're doing what they need, then fine. You know, I do know that, you know, Alpha wasn't doing as much. Sika called New York and asked, you know, told me he wanted to come back to work. So they brought him in, and he was being managed by what's his name, King Curtis. I guess maybe he was known as the Wizard or whatever.
Yeah, he was going to get a pretty big push at that point. I remember him on Saturday night's main event, I think, right?
Yeah. And, you know, working with Hogan. And, you know, we talked to Hogan, came to Alpha's house shortly after that, and we had a conversation about it. And, you know, it was all fine. And he was tag teaming with Kamala a little bit. And, you know, the bottom line is this: very little is not forgiven in the WWF. There's only a couple of guys I know that left and couldn't come back. And I don't even think it was that they couldn't, but they just weren't willing to come back under the circumstances they were being asked to come back under. You know, but if you really think about it, there's only probably 2 or 3 guys that ever left and literally were never asked back for anything. You know, it's just a matter of cooler heads. And, you know, when Bruno came back after leaving and giving up the title, I mean, Bruno certainly didn't call asking to come back and get the title a second time. They decided that's what they needed to do. They got on a plane, went to Pittsburgh, and convinced him to come back. You know, now, how many times Vince McMahon and his father got on a plane to try to convince somebody to come wrestle for them?
Right.
You know, you make this about emotion, and you might make it about emotion in the moment. But when you wake up tomorrow morning, is that really, you know, I've made emotional business decisions, and I can tell you the majority of them don't work out very well. You know, if you had a chance to count to 10 or wait till the next morning, things are going to be different. And, you know, so the timing's right. They went in, and then, you know, then of course these kids go in and they're smashing it. And, you know, hopefully everything continues to go well for them. And, you know, continue making the company money and making themselves money. And, but it's a different business today. Let's face it. You know, it's a totally different business today.
Sal, would you say that today's wrestling is in a very healthy state, business speaking, or no? I mean, whether you like the product or not, I mean, what would you say about the business itself? Is wrestling safe right now?
Well, it seems to be. I mean, there's a lot of TV money being thrown around. Even this AEW seems to, you know, a lot of people say they're not making the best decisions, but you know what? This guy's having fun, and I don't know, you know, they'd have to tell us how much money they're losing for us to know anything about it. But, you know, they told me a few years back that the WWE audience turns over every 2.5 years. As long as people are being born and cycling through, and I guess it's okay, but
Well,
it's really more of a TV product. I mean, you had to draw in the arenas back in the day to make any real money.
I think what they do is it goes on a downturn, and that's where they start getting the kids ready for that next group that grows up for the next 20 years, and it's worked for a long time. Sal, one thing I did want to say, first of all, prayers to you and your family and the loss of your sister. I didn't get a chance to get that in as we were talking. I didn't want to interrupt. And also, you touched one of the family members out there, Guardians of Chaos. Prayers to him as he shared with the family that he had lost his daughter, and he certainly knows what you're going through. So prayers to both of you.
Thank you. It is like I say, I've just thought about it so much. There are bad people in the world, and quite honestly, there are probably children that have made their parents sorry that they were born. And even then, I'm sure that's a loss that still hurts people. It's the whole thing. I don't have any children, so that's not a burden that I'm going to feel. But to be honest with you, I mean, just talking to Davey O'Hannon the other day, I mean, briefly, it's like, so many of us are, every day, it's just more and more and more and more. You don't know. I mean, quite honestly, if I called Jimmy Hart or Stan Lane or the guy that taught me the autograph business, Ray Courts, they're literally expecting a call that somebody died.
Mm.
Jimmy said, Sal, you ring the phone. I know there's a good chance somebody died. It's not always that, but certain people I call as soon as possible and let them know that somebody passed. And it's sad that there's that many opportunities to have to pass that along. But I'm getting older, and stands to reason. And then look how many people are younger, and they're gone.
Sal, before we go, you've done, especially the wrestling world, but you've done so much with your life. Is there anything that you would have done differently?
Yeah, I would have to say I would have probably worked harder to get a full-time position refereeing with the WWE. If we're talking about wrestling, look, there's always things I would have done differently, and and I think anybody who says they wouldn't change a thing doesn't really ring true to me, because not everything's gone perfect, and if you got a chance to change it, now who knows, you may change the one thing goes good and three more go bad. But I probably would have gone along to get along a little bit better. Like I really didn't, I just kind of stomped around with the Samoans, and I really didn't try to work full time for the WWE. I had opportunities to work some shows and so forth, and everything went well. But in my mind, I'm now in the wrestling business. Should this be a career? And then I made a couple of other moves that probably weren't brilliant. Now, it's okay. I've done a lot, but it would have been nice to work in Madison Square Garden and some of these things. That didn't happen. I mean, I've refereed all over the world. I've made center ring at the Garden, but for boxing, not for wrestling, and so forth. But when I look back, to be honest with you, so many people look at what I've done and wish that they had those opportunities.
Mm.
So it's very hard, to say. But when you ask me would I have done some stuff different, yeah, I probably would have. And I can't believe that we've already reached the end of the time here. It feels like we've been talking for 10 minutes, but
that's one thing Jimmy and I have learned. An hour is nothing. It's
Yeah.
nothing. It's like you could go, especially with someone with you with all this content, we could go 3 hours. But the best part is we have you back on and we go a little more. Before we go, Guardian Chaos is asking you a specific question. I believe you've had a long-time friend in Robbie Colasandro. Am I saying that right? A Colasurdo?
Robbie Colasurdo, yes.
From Westcon Beer Distributors back in the 80s. Is that the case?
Well, I don't know about that. Robbie Colasurdo and his brother Doug, along with Vinny and Jimmy Sansone, own the Gold's Gyms up in Connecticut. Now that's called the Edge, and it's a 42 club chain. But I've known Robbie since the I guess the late 90s. He's a good guy. So yeah. Matter of fact, I was just asking somebody. I do believe he's down here in Florida now in the Jupiter area. Good guy. Robbie and his brother Doug, both very, very good guys from up in Connecticut. Now, if he worked at a beer distributor before that, I've never been told that story, but just to close, it's been a rough week with Sika, and of course everybody's been following off his health issues, and of course this has to be huge for him. I haven't had a chance to speak to him yet. I do know he's in Pensacola. They loaded him in a van and took him to Pensacola. And this is the thing, Rafa's got his own health. There was nothing that was going to keep him in the Orlando area. He was going to go there for his brother, and that's it. Bruno, this one is for me and my life is the equivalent of losing Bruno. And, you just go on, but, he'll never be out of my memory. And we didn't even get to, I started thinking the stories I'm going to tell. We didn't even scratch the surface. So, but I love Sika. The opportunities he gave me, the things. I mean, look, this is what I will close with. A lot of guys grew up watching baseball. I was one of them. Did I ever dream that I would be out on the field with Tom Seaver and, or Bobby Mercer? You can't even fathom that. But I went from being scared to death of these people to being their tag team partner, their confidant, their friend. How mind-blowing that is for a young guy starting to watch wrestling, and then you find out you're in the ring with these guys and you're eating with these guys and you're in their house and they're coming to your house. And, just inconceivable, really, but, it all happened. So for Sika and hopefully the family is getting through everything up there. I've been in some contact, but, I guess he'll be put to rest here soon. And then, as it does with all death, unfortunately, we're all going to go on the best we can.
Sal, it's always an honor. Jimmy, want to send us out. Sal, thanks again. And thank you for allowing your time to we could have a tribute for this all-time great Samoan Sika.
Thank you very much, guys.
Jimmy.
You've been watching This Week in Wrestling with special guest Sal Corrente. Rest in peace, Sika.